Your mind will lie to you to keep you intact. It will invent reasons, alter scenes, and stitch new edges onto old memories so that the story of you remains uninterrupted. That is not a moral failing. It is the discovery at the heart of psychoanalysis. The ego will defend itself. Sigmund Freud named the machinery. He mapped the mechanisms that smoothed the jagged edges between desire and reality. He placed a scalpel on the self and found a factory of excuses. Picture a man alone at 2 a.m., the office lights cold, his phone face down on a desk littered with printouts. He opens a message, reads 3 words, his face tightens, and then he puts the phone back into his pocket. He does not confront. He tells himself he was tired. He imagines the sender meant something else. He sleeps. The next morning he rehearses the alternate reading aloud until his memory obeys. The scene is banal. It is the mind at work. Why does this happen? Because paradox is the mind's currency. The same brain that seeks truth also protects the self from truths that would cause unbearable change. Cognitive dissonance theory showed us this with clinical clarity. People will change their memories, attitudes, even their reported experiences to reduce psychological pain. Leon Festinger's experiments in the 1950s were elegantly cruel. Participants paid $1 to lie about a tedious task, convinced themselves later that it had been enjoyable. When actions and beliefs diverge, belief often bends. Here is a fact that should unsettle you. Memory is not a recording, it is rehearsal. Each time you remember, you re-edit. Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated this with a garden variety phrase. Ask a witness how fast the cars were going when they smashed into one another, and they'll estimate higher speeds. Use the word hit, and the estimate lowers. Ask later whether there was broken glass, and witnesses will invent shards that never existed. You can plant a memory of being lost in a mall as easily as you can plant the idea of a childhood injury. Eyes and ears are not neutral collectors, they are translators. Translation is interpretation, and interpretation is motivated. We mistake this for individuality. We believe that the self we experience is the true self. We tell ourselves that the person who made that decision was acting freely. But the architecture beneath is strategic, not honest. Consider confabulation, damaged frontal lobes, gaps in memory, and the brain brazenly fills the white space with narrative. A patient will describe an elaborate dinner he never ate, or an office he never visited, with the same conviction available to a sober witness. The content is fabricated, but the motive is the same as the motives Freud described: coherence, continuity, protection. The mechanism has scale. It moves from quiet intrusions into daily life to the halls of power. Political leaders who cannot admit error rationalize policy failures. Organizations that face collapse rewrite histories. Jurors believe eyewitness testimony because recollection feels like authority. The Innocence Project's records are blunt. Eyewitness misidentification contributed to roughly 70% of wrongful convictions later overturned by DNA. Truth in legal settings dies not from malice but from memory's politeness, its willingness to make a story work. There are experiments that will sound almost pinnacle in their cruelty. In studies of motivated reasoning, participants interpret the same piece of ambiguous evidence differently depending on which conclusion protects their identity. Present a sports fan with a replay of a missed call and watch him reconstruct angles and sound to argue that the referee robbed his team. Give a CEO data that contradicts a strategic plan and observe the same CEO cherry-pick metrics until the plan looks validated. The mind specializes in confirmation. It sifts, it selects, it protects. You see this in the small actions you perform without noticing. You type a text, you delete it, you rewrite it twice. You rehearse a conversation with your boss, imagining acceptance because a hostile response would require a different life. You remember your ex as worse than they were, or kinder. Your memory's edits protect your self-concept, capable, moral, sensible, by reducing the cognitive demand of admitting error or cruelty. This is not abstract. It is tactile. The throat tightens, the palms sweat. You invent an explanation and breathe easier. There is a darker turn. Self-deception confers power. Nietzsche called the masks we wear necessary, illusions that allow action. Machiavelli would note the utility appearances keep others compliant. Michel Foucault mapped the systems that make self-knowledge an instrument of control. When you deceive yourself, you maintain stability. When a regime deceives itself, it maintains domination. Self-deception is not merely private bad faith, it lubricates social systems. What makes it dangerous is its persistence and invisibility. Biases are systematic. Confirmation bias prefers data that confirms. Choice. Supportive bias reshapes events to favor past decisions. The Dunning-Kruger effect ensures that those least competent are most competent in their false narratives. Imagine leaders who cannot see their own errors because the mechanisms that preserve coherence have been weaponized into ideology. Imagine relationships where both parties rewrite the story until mutual contempt reads like inevitability. The brain's private therapist can become a communal assassin. There are methods, modest and clinical, that reveal this machinery. Slow down. Notice the hesitation before you repeat a story. Ask, who benefits from this interpretation? Test your memory against external records. When a memory feels convenient, treat it with suspicion. Psychotherapies exploit memory's malleability both to heal and to manipulate. Reconsolidation research shows that when a memory is recalled, it becomes malleable. New information can alter it permanently. That means your recollections are susceptible to correction, but also to exploitation. You might expect a comforting prescription at this moment. There is none that returns you to a pure, unassailable self. The insight here is not liberation but clarity. Your consciousness is an editorial project, not a faithful witness. Accepting that makes you less pained by your inconsistencies. It also makes you more vulnerable. Knowing the techniques of rationalization lets you see them in others and in institutions. It gives you tools. It does not grant immunity. So ask yourself a few difficult, surgical questions. Which of your memories stabilize your identity? Which of your beliefs justify behavior that contradicts your stated values? Whose face are you protecting when you smooth a fracture into a fable? When you become aware of the mind's hospitality toward lies, what will you do with that knowledge? There is no tidy resolution. The mind will continue to lie because it must. It is adaptive. It keeps you coherent. But coherence comes at a cost, the erosion of objective reality, the creation of fragile agreements with others, the persistence of injustice because no one wants to lift the veil. Look closely, listen to the small edits, notice the stories you repeat with convenience. You are being kept whole. You are being misled. Which truth do you want to carry forward, the one that makes living simpler or the one that asks you to risk being different? The answer will reveal you more honestly than any memory ever will.